morning to those of you joining us just now. Welcome to the EU-Canada Business Summit 2020, where we're about to start our second panel of the day. My name is Eline Chivot. I'm a policy analyst at the Center for Data Innovation. We're a think tank based in Brussels and DC, for which I cover EU tech policy here in Brussels. To our audience online, thank you for joining. Please feel free to engage on social media using the handle @CE Canada Europe. And because during our talk we'll allow some time for questions and answers with you and our discussants, do write your questions in the Q&A section of this platform. Our topic for the next hour, which I have the pleasure to moderate, will be security and transport. And to set the scene first, some context to give us some food for thought. The transport and security sectors have or will have many challenges to address, protecting and improving the resilience of critical infrastructures, supply chains and transport modes, strengthening security through border management, improving cybersecurity. Economies will aim to boost the competitiveness of the transport industry while achieving smart, green and integrated transport. And with higher security requirements and environmental concerns, and of course the additional challenges raised by COVID-19 and the recession, there is a lot to take on, and the transport sector is under pressure. Against this background, there are also concerns over the dependence of Western economies on foreign providers, with companies from China increasingly investing and taking over domestic firms. So what has been industry's response and strategies to reconcile these demands, those urgent requirements and the expectations? What does it need to remain a sustainable industry? Should it adopt revolutionary approaches, or will change be more incremental? What are today's and tomorrow's threats and opportunities? How can Canadian and European businesses work hand in hand, and how can policies support them? With us to discuss this, I'm very happy to welcome our two distinguished speakers. First, Johan Diepens, founder and CEO of Mobycon, which is a consultancy firm that applies Dutch transport expertise, and he'll be joining us from The Hague in the Netherlands. And then Stéphane Feray-Beaumont, who's Vice President Innovation and Smart Mobility at Alstom, joining us from Brussels. So I think we'll have our panelists soon with us on this stage. Again, reminding you that you can post your questions in the Q&A in the right side of your screen. And let's see when our panelists come in. Hello, thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Thank you. Let's maybe, I'm not sure we should wait for the next speaker to come in, or if you've heard did you hear my introduction well?
A part of it, to be honest. Huh? Yeah.
Well, you know the topic, right? We've discussed it, so there's not going to be any surprise. I'm happy to have you with us today to discuss the challenges of the security and transport sector. Maybe to kick off the discussion before a second discussant joins, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how the industry is doing. So we'll hear from, on the EU side, on Canada's side, how is it trying to bounce back in the current turmoil? Is there some light at the end of the tunnel? And if so, how long is the tunnel?
There's always light in a tunnel at the end. Huh? That's the good part of
Maybe
a tunnel.
Maybe it's a train, though.
Yeah. Okay, that's true. Huh? You never know. Huh? I think if you look at especially the transport industry, then what we see in the Netherlands and also part of Europe, what I see is that the normal transport, freight, etc., goes quite well, in my opinion. The discussion about transport is transport of people, the public transport, and that everything is quite empty, like the metro in Paris, the systems in the Netherlands, the system in Germany, and that is, I think, a real disaster, in fact, because the whole system is based, we always focusing on public transport, and now we lose it a little bit. And what we know is that if we take a long time to get clients in the public transport, but a longer time to get them back if they go out of the system. But you also see a lot of things is that in public transport, the way of financing is a problem with the tendering, the contracts. Sometimes the risk is at the operator, sometimes the risk is at the government, but both sides are in trouble right now. So that makes me a lot of concerns about this solution that we had, a lot of people together. And that seems to be, I think, also, if you look at Canada, what I see that public transport is, to be honest, less popular. It's more local and not on the longer tracks. It already took a lot of our attention in the past to get it more into the focus of the people, but I think now it's quite difficult to get it back.
Thank you very much, Johan. We still don't have we still don't have Stéphane with us from Alstom, but I'll still continue with you then. Have you already started to see examples of how industry is trying to overcome this difficult period with best practices, the collaborations or partnerships within Europe, within the Netherlands, perhaps within Europe, and also with Canada? Are there any examples?
There are, of course, examples. That is also how you can make it more flexible, the whole system. The risk, of course, is if you are trained to move at least 40 people in a bus, and suddenly it are 5 people or 8 people, then your balance, your financial balance goes a little bit wrong. So what we see right now is that also in what we call public transport demand, it goes wrong. More and more what we see is that we make a change to cycling. That's also what's happening in Paris right now. 600-kilometer cycle tracks, because people have not the guts to go into the metro system. So that is a whole move, I think, worldwide, what we see, that cycling gets more and more important. And also, there's also a little bit of combination, but a difficult one, because to earn money with it, it's quite difficult for public transport companies. So then you go more to the governmental side who moves than the side from the transport. I think personally that all the public transport companies are in trouble.
Yeah, and it's, even though, I mean, there are some, we could see things in a positive light. It's great that people take more, the bike, but what does that mean for the type of transformation public transport companies need to operate? So, yeah, I think this is definitely...
If you look at the longer term, I think that, personally, I think it's good that more people discover the bike. That's also a little bit in our vision, that's important. What we have seen always is that a lot of trips are quite short, also in public transport in cities, and that people are really able to go to move themselves, to say it in that way. It's more for the health, is better. And it also means that you get your social item for public transport perhaps can get a little bit less, because now you have to move to all the town areas, to move everywhere, just to deliver, to be there. And I think it can be interesting for the future if we are able to make a competitive public transport, where people use the bike, bulk, and then for the longer distances, a longer distance between bus stops, that means that the price goes down and that you can deliver more. So it can be better at the longer future, at the end of the tunnel, where there is some light.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that in Canada, maybe public transport is less popular. And I know in the Netherlands, it's interesting to see that many people use the bike. And at the same time, there is definitely use of public transport. People go from Amsterdam to Rotterdam or The Hague for work every day. And I definitely found myself in one of those very busy trains in the Netherlands. Sometimes you can't even fit. So we'll come back to your points a little bit later, but first let's welcome our second discussant, Stéphane Feray-Beaumont of Alstom, your Vice President of Innovation and Smart Mobility. Thank you for joining. I'm glad you've made it, and I'm going to just ask you the sort of introductory question I've asked Johan Diepens from Mobycon earlier. How is the industry doing? How can it bounce back? And is there, some sort of hope for recovery, either through best practices, more funding? Just happy to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Eline. Sorry about this bit of hiccups. I was lost somewhere in the corridors of the virtual event. And, didn't really find my way through the stage. This crisis is, how can I say? When I usually take part of this event, I take two images. One is at the beginning of this year, I was showing very crowded platforms, public transport platforms, and congested traffic. And when we were back in May, all of these picture was completely outdated and everything was empty. And now we are slowly recovering. So now, what does it mean? It means that today we are in a restore confidence mode in terms of public transportation, in terms of transportation, and making sure that the perception is on its way back to healthier mobility, safer mobility, more secure mobility. And I'm sure that we'll elaborate more on all those topics. So, and it's not only the fact that we are actually doing these things about healthier, safer, more secure. It's also the perception that needs to get back to more alignment with what it is in reality, because we can build the healthier and the safest industry in the world if it's not being perceived. We know that perception at the end of the day is going to be a reality. So, today what we are into is restoring confidence, is quick measures, whether it's technical, whether it's financial, whether it's political support, policies, blah, blah, blah. Something that can be really quick in terms of how we deal with this event that we are into, and then looking into what are going to be the trends which are going to stick for longer. The trend of urbanization may change a bit on where people are going to live versus where they are going to work, but the trend for a greener transportation and a greener industry in more general, the trend for less impact on the planet is going to stick and is going to be a trend which ultimately is going to shape even more than what we saw before the crisis, what's going to be the world of tomorrow.
Just to summarize, you mentioned this important focus on safer, more secure mobility at the moment, and restoring self-confidence of the industry, but also sort of change the perception of users back to the type of perception we had of public transport before. And you mentioned, the importance to identify the trends that will stick in terms of what kind of urbanization patterns will we have in terms of greener transportation mode. Just to circle back to a point that Johan made before you came in, he mentioned that the way of financing remains a problem in the sector, especially now because both government and industry are affected and limited in how much they can, finance transformative strategies. How could you react on this? Do you think, recovery plans address sufficiently the challenges of your industry, for instance?
Let me be a little bit straightforward. I have no crystal ball, so knowing what the impact of the boost economy plans in different countries are going to, how they are going to materialize, a little bit beyond what I can say. But let's make it clear: we are in this transforming mode, which plenty of interaction between industries, not only transportation, but between industries in general. And all of these initiatives may not go into the same direction. And consistency in between all those policies is going to be a key driver and a key success factor at the end of the day. You can't push on one side and push on another side at the same time. It has to be seen as holistically and consistently. I'm in the rail industry. I could say that, guys, rail is the safest transportation mode is the greenest, blah, blah, blah. So put everything on rail and forget about the other transportation mode. But rail is not the only transportation mode for sure. And it has to be seen, again, as one of the transportation mode in the chain. And when we look at the entire chain, if I am in the mind of a user, end user, what I want is not to go from rail station A to rail station B, is to where I live, to where I work, where I live to where I have my leisures, where I live to where I want to spend my holidays. And it includes a lot of different transport that needs to be connected. And by the way, it includes also some other industries. And we will talk about security on how to be taken care of during the entire journey, and making sure that, again, all along the journey experience, and more than the journey itself, but the experience of the journey is going to be taken care of. And this has to be seen as really a system aspect, with all of this interaction not being independent to one another, which again is probably highlighting the level of complexity of how all these different policies and different boost plans need to be connected to one another. So that's for me the challenge. So are those initiatives welcome? For sure, definitely. And as we are going to together, policymakers, finance stakeholders, industry stakeholders, we're going to restore this confidence in the people. Then it's all about making sure that we are all consistent in the way we promote these things.
Check, and definitely the message of consistency definitely sticks out, and interesting that you mentioned that, you know, any mode of transport should be part of a mix of modes and not just as one and isolated transport mode. I wanted to, I have a lot of questions, of course, but maybe back to you, Johan. I'm sure you have some reactions to share on what you've heard, and maybe also, you know, in terms of the future trends that you think will stick, in terms of urbanization, greener transportation. What do you see will happen in the coming years?
Yes, okay. I think first, the greener transportation, that's an issue that we have to solve, and it will come. I think the pressure gets higher and higher, the attention also on the European Commission. I think in Canada, to be honest, it's a little bit less, the feeling that there should be done something. But what's important, I think, we talked about the tunnel and the light at the tunnel at the end. I think if we are there, that we are arriving in a different world with different habits from people. We discover, in fact, more faster than we ever had expected, the way of digital life, that we can work digital, that we can have conferences digital. In fact, that the reason to move from A to B gets a little bit different. And also that we discover more and more worldwide, the local world, in fact. And people work from home, but so they find again their bakery around the corner, their sport club, etc. So I think what you see worldwide right now, especially in the Western world, is that we discover a little bit that we can work and live in a much smaller world than we expected before. And you see that. You see in Italy, you see that people from South Italy who worked in North Italy, they all move back to the villages in South Italy and start working there for their boss in North Italy. And you see it in New York, where a lot of people move to the rural areas. You see it also here in the Netherlands, and you see it also, I think, in Germany. So it can be a challenge, it can be good, it can be bad. But what you see is that people say, okay, where I live is not connected anymore to the place where I should work. And big cities like New York are more a threat for my health than I think that I'm somewhere in the woods. Now, that means that the moment that people will say, okay, I have to go to New York, or I have to go to Toronto, or I have to go to Amsterdam, has a lot of other influence than before. Not the daily life at 7 o'clock, I step into the train and I have my daily pattern every day. So that will be, and what you see, I think, in the Netherlands is that, and also in Europe, that we have to struggle a little bit with that, because it means for the rail transport system that there is a good future, and it means for the bus systems that there is no future. Because what I said, I think that a lot of people discover the bike and walking, and they walk and go to the rail systems. So it will change, I think, a lot for that. But it means also that the way that we invest in our infrastructure should be different than before.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I'm just wondering, do you think that those trends will last? Just a quick follow-up question. You know, there's just new work patterns, working remotely, and I mean, in the sense that it will really profoundly transform and durably, for the long term, transform what we know now in terms of use of public transport.
Yeah, I think that we finally get back to our normal balance. We have discovered, we call it the Braver law, and that means that we want to spend the same time in traffic as the Romans did 2,000 years ago. They had horses, they didn't go that far. But in fact, if you have a balance of around between 70 and 90 minutes that you have mobility, that means that you have a social life besides that. If you have to travel 2 hours each day to work and 2 hours back, it means that you are late at home again, that you can't have a social life anymore, you can't sport, you can't that. And that's something that has nothing to do with transport, but it has the people find back a little bit their balance. And I think that with all the stuff that we have right now, that we can find a balance much better in the future than we did before.
Mm-hmm. And maybe some of this pandemic, with the impact of this pandemic, environmental concerns have become even more integrated into people's preferences for mobility. I'd like to turn again to you, Stéphane, as I suppose Alstom is doing business with Canada. Can you tell us a little bit more about this market, how it envisages mobility, and how does that differ from the EU?
So maybe before I jump into your question, I agree with you, Johan, about the fact that with some of the lessons of the pandemic, we are going to see differently how to work from a different place. And what we are experiencing now is the example and the demonstration of what you say. And by the way, Eline, I'm not sitting in Brussels, I'm sitting in Paris.
Oh, I'm
sorry. That doesn't make a big difference, look, you know. However, there are people who just cannot work from remote. When you're on the shop floor and you're on a factory, you need to be there and you need to go there. And maybe you're not in the vicinity of the premise. So TrainStation is going to remain for some social categories something which really takes to their life. And at the end of the day, TrainStation is not only to move people; it's also to move goods. And here is how I can maybe jump into what you asked me, Eline. Canada is such a huge country. Like when we look at Canada, we look at a territory which is totally different from what we experience in between brackets, small countries in Europe. And the distance and the size of the distance in between the different place we want to move things is making it very special. And maybe public transportation is a little bit less in between bracket as well versus the freight than we are experiencing in Europe. And you were talking about those policies about to reboost the transportation system, and freight is becoming a very a very strong direction of where people want to go. Probably in Canada, it's already there by nature, because of the way the cities are connected to one another, etc. So when we are looking from a transportation system at what it is that we can do for such a big country, we think about again what it means from the transportation system by itself. How do I make sure that the solution I'm bringing are adapted to the specificities of the countries, big distances, different way to see the transportation system within cities. And I agree with Johan when he says that some of the usage are going to change drastically from people are not going to the place they used to go from an office standpoint or whatever. And we are going to see these changes, and we need to adapt. We are in Alstom. I'm going to take a very specific examples. We are engaged in transportation project in Montreal, and I have in mind this wonderful session I had with two people. One was a lady in a wheelchair, disabled, and one was a blind man with very severe difficulty to move. And those two people, with their enthusiasm and energy, were telling us, if you design the transportation system for us, then you design it for the entire population. Then you design for women with children. Then you design for people who may have temporary difficulties to see things or not familiar with the signage, blah, blah, blah. And inclusiveness and thinking about different ways to offer the service is going to be something that really talks. And it comes from, again, places like Canada where inclusiveness is really at the heart of the mind of people, the society, and has a direct impact of what it is that we do.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting. And I mean, my role as a moderator is not to give my point of view, but of course, I agree it's important to make sure that your solutions are adapted to the market and consumers' habits. Otherwise, I mean, that's rule number one. If your product is for no one will use it. But at the same time, and I'd like to maybe ask both of you, but starting again with you, Stéphane. I know that, Alstom has a long-standing knowledge in electric vehicles and other promising systems. That what is needed as well to, from the cities, perhaps from governments, local governments, but also national governments, to better target investments to ensure there is a space for these new forms of mobility and systems to exist, and what is needed to transform those cities and environments to accommodate to those new forms of mobility that you can propose, if that makes sense.
It does. And it's all about making sure that you build the ecosystem in a structured way. It's not only the solution providers, it's the operators, it's how you connect all these things together. The infrastructure is going to change. So the mobility, the vehicle are going to change. But look, let's make the comparison with the car industry. And I have a lot of respect for the car industry. But if you look at a traffic jam of today's car, and today you have a traffic jam of electric cars, or tomorrow you have a traffic jam of autonomous car, still a traffic jam. So if we want to address for the people who still have to move or wants to move in the city, we need to make sure, together with the local authorities, that everything is being orchestrated, that someone has a vision of what the various transportation mode in the city, how they can connect to one another, how they can benefit from one another, how they can work together. And this multimodal orchestration is going to be key at territory level, not only city, but cities with the surrounding, so that again you can have multiple ways or multiple mode that you need to connect to one another to go from again where you want to go. That's going to be orchestrated at territory level. We can't expect that by magic everything is going to fall in the right place, and that at the end of the day some kind of super intelligence is going to make it happen. Something has to be done to make sure that there is a way to organize all of these services. It's all about smart cities and smart mobility as being part of the smart cities. Smart is when someone, and it's not one individual, but it's just a combination of stakeholders, understand what the service is going to be at the end of the day, and how to make it happen. So for me, the message is making sure that we structure the ecosystem. It's not only a one-man show or a one-company show. It's really making sure that everyone is looking toward the same direction. And it includes policymakers, it includes technology providers, it includes regulatory bodies, it includes all of these ecosystems to make it really successful at the end of the day.
Thank you so much. I'm sure, Johan, you have some comments on those points, the importance of structure, the ecosystem, and having a vision for multimodal and involve everyone, policymakers, tech providers, industry, I suppose.
Yeah, of course. That's why you hired me for here.
Exactly.
No, of course, I agree a lot with Stéphane, but I think we have to move a little bit faster in thinking. I think if you look to Europe, then you see that we have a lot of older cities who are already car-free, areas for pedestrians and cyclists. And you see there's always a discussion, how do you deliver your goods in those kind of areas? And in fact, I think the whole discussion is always about the first mile and the last mile. And in between, it's not that difficult because you can combine a lot of stuff together. What we see, what I think personally, is that the city should belong to people for their activities and not for moving goods and people through all streets. So that means that there is a stream coming up that, by example, the big trucks that are quite normally in our cities these days, that we should free the cities from those trucks because the mass is too big and in fact the safety and also the environmental issues are too big for those trucks. And that's what we see. I think that the government should take the lead in this and say, okay, we have a concession in areas where you can deliver your last mile. And that means for me that it gets smaller buses, electric vehicles, but also cargo bikes, etc. We have discussions here in the Netherlands with PostNL about this kind of things. That means for me that there is one party who deliver the goods for the last mile. And the interesting part is again the social event. We have done an experiment in Rotterdam where a big apartment, a lot of apartments together, that there were a few people who were very lonely. And they were the address where they put all the packages there, so people could pick them up when they came home from work. So those people meet people again. So that's interesting. I'm not completely left or social, but it's interesting constantly to see how you can combine the transport system with some small issues that can make life better for people. What I see is that we get more smaller issues for the last mile, and we try to optimize in between. And that means that you need an organization. It's not a Wild West with all kinds of transport companies, but you should organize it, how you do it, and how you play that, optimize it also for energy and the environment. I think Europe is far ahead from Canada in that way. I think the rail system in Canada, what I see, is quite poor, to be honest. Also the goods that go. It's still a truck that moves everything from A to B. I think that in Canada we should make very big steps in that kind of way that we optimize the whole system. And also, if you look at the environmental part in Canada, I try to combine Canada and Europe a little bit in this discussion because I come a lot over there. I think that there should be a big difference coming up and that we should invest in rail in Canada for that part between the first mile and the last mile to optimize it. The same as in Montreal. I think, for example, metro systems, we could use them at night for goods to move from A to B. Nobody is there, so you can move a lot of stuff. So you should invest a little bit, of course, in places where you can put the stuff, etc., and do that kind of things. But we try to make our cities a little bit more livable. Also, what I said, people inspire that local experience more and more and more. If you can organize that, and it will take a lot of discussion, but we have to speed that up because it's already there. It doesn't cost that much. Then you can optimize your city, make it more livable. And I think that's a big benefit from the whole transport system. And also the electrification is also, I think, it's coming. You can't stop it or other good, but not the fuel anymore in the old way that we had.
Thanks, Johan. Oh, sorry. Did you want to continue?
No, that was just my finishing.
Thank you, Stéphane. Do you agree? Is there something you can comment on about Canada being perhaps less advanced on things, and more investment is needed in rail there?
I'm going to be very humble. I've been to some Canadian city, and in some aspect there are plenty of smart things being done in Canada, which maybe some European city can take some good advantage of. So it's always a mixed bag. Now again, the usage of downtown tram station, I agree with Johan. There are plenty of places already in Europe or in some other place which are zero emission or trying to go there in the short term, which ultimately is going to shape the way we perceive the city centers, which may not be the case still in Canada. On the other way around, the size of the city in Canada is much larger than in Europe. So, let's define what a city center is. Let's define how long is the last mile, because sometimes it's a couple of 100 meters, and sometimes maybe the last mile is 20 kilometers. And I know it doesn't make any sense to say that 1 mile is 20 kilometers. I appreciate that, but frankly, this modal chain is going to look like very differently from one city to another one, from one usage to another one. So there is a lot to be adapted locally, so that at the end of the day, yes, we have this zero emission zone in cities where it's given back to people. Fully agree. So that at the end of the day, we as individuals can live. But you know what? As much as I live not in Paris downtown and a little bit away, I'm not living where the food is being produced. So at the end of the day, someone will have to bring the food to me. Someone will have to bring the energy to me. Someone will have to bring what I need to live to me, which ultimately is going to be this supply chain, but supply chain to the individual, not supply chain to the industry. And that's what we need to rethink. And using some of the existing transportation in a different way has been done, for sure. Now, we have to think about what was the original design purpose. Changing the design purpose may ultimately change the solution. Trying to tweak stuff and tinker around can be a short-term solution, but at the end of the day, let's have a respect for technical people and engineers. When we give them a set of expectation, a set of performance, a set of requirement, they are going to provide the solution. If we are not giving them the right set of requirement, or if we are giving them a different set of requirement, maybe the solution at the end of the day is not going to be the best one. So thinking about what it needs to be in the short term, trying to do the best with what we have, and thinking about what is going to be the city of the future and how it should be changed, maybe two different things. There is this quote of Pollard which says that the things that made us successful today or yesterday may not be the thing that will make us successful tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And let's make sure that we are taking a step back and say, yeah, we can do things very shortly. As I said, for healthier, restoring confidence, healthier mobility, we need to do something to react. But reaction in the short term shall be seen maybe differently as what is going to come in a longer term, and what it is that we need to do to reach the end game.
Thanks. And I think that one thing that can help with that is to share, experiences and practices. And I like how you mentioned there are different challenges in the cities in Canada and in Europe. In Canada, they're bigger. In Europe, we have maybe historical architecture that stands in a way. And it's good that we connected with what Johan said earlier about, reusing or better using what is available, but underused, and maybe tweak stuff that's out there. Johan, did you want to add something?
Yeah, of course. I want to react to a few things. One is that, of course, there are a lot of big cities in North America, bigger than we are used to have them in Europe, and you can't copy Europe to Canada and vice versa. But there's one, I think, misunderstanding in the whole world always. But we do a lot of work in Europe. We work in Canada, in Toronto, Vancouver, Ottawa, Montreal, and also in smaller cities, but also in the US. And what we see, in fact, is that the patterns of people, not looking at goods completely, but the patterns of people are the same. Everybody, the most trips from people are within 15 kilometers. 80% of all the trips are in 15 kilometers. Doesn't matter how big your city is. There's nobody or a few people go from Eastern Toronto to West Toronto. They all have their own living areas and their own patterns. And if you look at the patterns, they're all the same. And the goods you can organize that in a certain way. And I think that we should move very quickly to optimize the delivery system. Of course, we need food. And there's no discussion if you live in Paris, in Rome, or in Toronto. But you can optimize the chain. And I think that we should focus on chains, how we can optimize them. And then you come back to the first and the last miles. The last mile is everywhere the same. Only the infrastructure is different. I think, to be honest, it's easier in Canada to bring your big truck for that last mile than it is in Europe. So that's something perhaps people can learn from each other. But what we see is also in making the world green again and about the environment is that we should be smarter in how we organize things. And I think that we should speed it up really fast because it's one of the weakest parts of the total chain. How it is done right now, but the patterns of people are the same everywhere. And we get more and more difficulties. We've done studies in areas from Toronto where there are now living 200,000 people. They want to build more houses and apartments, so it will increase to 400,000 people. You have no more space, so that means that the urban space should be more for the people. And then you should create something that is, you have to bring more food in to say so, but you have to do it in a smarter way. That we should be very creative and smart, I think. And there are a lot of smart people, so use them.
Can't hear you.
I have no sound. Oh, yeah.
I can hear you, Johan, but I can't hear Eline.
Sorry, yeah, I forgot to unmute it. That's a classic, as you know. I was just saying there's that I've heard of that what Johan said made me think about, which is the fact that some buildings are they're piling up additional stores and floors because the city is already full, and so the only way to make space is up. Anyway, but thanks for your comments. I have a follow-up question before we perhaps get back into the security aspects or cybersecurity aspects of the conversation. Do you think the future of the market or the sector belongs to multiple players? Because we're seeing a lot of fragmentation of providers of some sort, depending on the mobility types or modes of transport. Or do you think that the market will become more concentrated? Either of you.
Who are you talking?
Either of you who has thoughts on this.
Now, my opinion is that we talk a lot what we call about mobility as a service. That means that we try to fix it in the perfect way. I think at the moment it's a little bit the dream of a lot of people that it works. But in that whole field, I think that we need a good judge about things, and that should be the government, I think. So there should be a good framework where you could say, okay, this is the playground. I don't think that we need a very multiple one player. Yeah? I think it's better to have different parties who can offer part of the change for goods and for people, to make it also a little bit more specialized for the local situation, that you can move faster on things. But I think what I said, the judge, or perhaps also the be financed for the first steps is that our governments have a vision about what they want and how they can organize that. This whole organization, there are a lot of people who have good ideas, but what you see, if the market is one player, then it goes completely wrong. But I hope that it answers your question.
Sure, thanks.
Fully agree. Fully agree with Johan. It can't be, again, a one company or one stakeholder show because of the specificities of all the element in the chain. You can't be, it's like in mathematics, you can't optimize all across the chain. You need to make sure that you identify where you want to be, where you want to position your offer, and how this, within the value chain, how it makes sense to the other one. So multiplayers, for sure, that will have their value to bring, and an authority. Don't know if it's at government level, at city level, blah blah blah, but some kind of authority which is going to set the rules and set the game, or say, guys, this is what we need to achieve as an ecosystem again, and let's make sure that everything is going there. For me, this is how this smartest is going to be brought into this mobility world around territories.
Thank you. Yeah, and it certainly will lead to more opportunities as you have more players working potentially together. Now, if that's okay, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions regarding the security aspects of mobility. I mean, just one little example I have in mind is how sensors, for instance, are becoming integrated, or how, there's digital identity being integrated in transit for security, and there are some privacy concerns about, for instance, the use of biometrics. And that leads to hard questions, as mentioned, to security, cybersecurity of our infrastructure and privacy for consumers. Do you have any thoughts on how Canada, how Europe can ensure, and their industry, of course, can ensure that part of the challenge when it comes to their critical infrastructure? Perhaps Stéphane, if you want to.
So you said the word critical infrastructure, critical operators. It means that as soon as an infrastructure is declared critical, looking at cybersecurity, looking at how data are being managed, whether it's private or the data of the system, is becoming really critical. And there are here again another trend which is, let's put more open data. Let's make sure that everyone can share the data. This mobility as a service trend or dream that Johan was talking about is exactly that. Let's make sure that we open the data to everyone so that everyone can bring their service. But you can't, on one hand, having this openness, and on the other hand, being seen as a critical operator. So here the cursor, where you set the cursor is going to be very important. And here we need, again, policy makers to make sure that we are clear on how to make them understand what is at stake, so that they can make their choice at the end of the day. So now you're asking me about this facial recognition and things like that. I mean, frankly, I'm going to say that in the transport industry, we are here to move people. We may say that we want to ensure security of people with detecting some patterns, like, oh my God, I see an unattended luggage, and I declare it so that people know, and I track the people, the individual who left this and that unattended luggage. Fair enough. But who these guys is, or who this individual is not in the end of the mobility stakeholders. It's in the end of someone else. So now let's make sure that this, I'm going to say, the use case and the purpose of it is being clear and is being used in the proper way. I don't need, again, to move someone, I don't need to know who he is. Mm-hmm. And to make sure that this someone is moving in a secure or safe way, I don't know who he is. I just need to make sure that I'm putting together a very secure and safe environment around these people, whoever it is.
Yeah.
So that's and doing that is already a challenge about privacy. Doing that is already a challenge about sharing this information. Doing that is already a challenge about how we make sure that we keep the data in a safe way and secure.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's a big challenge. Digital is definitely a priority, and it will be necessary for the industry to transform. And Johan, sorry, maybe you want to respond to this part of the conversation on secure and private.
No, I think that Stéphane said a lot of good things about this. And the question is how much, from transport mobility perspective, what do you need to know? I think it's more a society discussion about safety and the feeling of safety than it is for mobility demands to problem well. Yesterday I had a discussion with the Dutch ministry about this. And in fact, then the discussion is always, if I know more, then I can create a better system. But the question is, mobility is a result of your planning system and your economic activities. Because then there's the reason why people want to go from A to B. So if there are new ways that people want to live or go, then you're always behind with your system. So for that purpose, you need data. Data is very important, but sometimes I think we overreact a little bit about data. It also means that you need a vision about things. And for the safety part, you can put humans in a train to look at people, and you can put cameras in a train. But I think there is somewhere a limit when you say, I need to know who you are exactly. And this, I agree with Stéphane. I don't like that will, but we will see how far we go with that.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I can understand and I can concur that to provide safe and secure mobility, you don't need to know who people are, but in order to make sure that you provide services efficiently, you do need to know sometimes a little bit more in the data, what kind of profiles, what kind of family, what kind of types of consumers are you dealing with, and that does data can definitely add value for a lot of businesses in that sense. I did have a little question concerning, I mean, I don't want to talk about the Alstom Siemens merger per se, merger that didn't happen, but we talked earlier, I mean, unless you want to, I just didn't want to touch upon it if it was a sensitive topic. I wanted to go more broadly into, we have—
This one is behind us.
Sorry?
This one is far behind us. The Alstom Siemens is behind us. Let's talk about another one.
I'm sure. So the more general question I'm wondering, and that goes for both of you, is to strengthen our markets and our industry. We have China that's rising, and to strengthen maybe bonds between Canada and the EU. Is that an idea? Should the rise of bigger companies be championed by each country's, the EU and Canada's industrial policies? Does that make sense for the future of the industry? Bigger players.
Yeah, I think for some parts of the industries, this can be an issue because you have to combine your forces to get your basic equipment or basic minerals and that kind of stuff. The other part is that what I see is that the culture within Europe and Canada and also the US, by example, is completely different from things. We are a consultant firm and we are around 100 people. But what I see in Canada at the moment, where we have competition with our companies with 30,000 people, so there is already something big going on, and we don't have that kind of companies. Our scene somewhere in Europe at the moment. I think to move forward for our area, it's not needed. I think you also have smaller who are a little bit faster in developments, and I think that can be the risk if you make big companies, but that's my area. If you look at the transport scene, if you frame buses and trains, and I can imagine are only a few players, to be honest. I don't like if there's only one player at the end, but I think Stéphane knows more about that area than me, to be honest.
So totally agree with you, and it truly depends on what is the part of the industry we're talking about. I think almost monopolies. We know in different sectors how it can be a little bit harmful. Now, in the transport sector, we need to make sure that at the end of the day, competition will remain. Consolidation in this sector has been something that the industry has been talking about for decades. I'm in this industry. I've been in this industry for almost 30 years now, and frankly, it has always been something that we were discussing about. Now it's taking place, maybe because of this giant company that was built in China, maybe because of other reasons, but it's taking place. Now the thing is, you were talking about culture, Johan. Yes, I agree that cultures are different. Cultures are also good. Again, diversity and inclusiveness is something that we need to bring in when we are in the mobility sector so that we adapt locally. And being local everywhere is the way to be global. And when joining two companies like what we are going to hopefully do in a couple of months with our Bombardier company, is going to bring this another set of combining culture, another advantage of combining culture. I have a lot of respect for the company, for the Bombardier company, like I had with for Siemens, and joining the two companies is going to be a way to offer a multiple set of solution adapted to a multiple set of culture, a multiple set of usage. Even if at the end of the day, again, I agree with you, it's all about the last mile or whatever. But in between the last mile, it's not as easy as sometimes you may think it is, Johan. But anyway, so joining these two companies, making a big company to be able to face the challenge of the bigger global expectation and in front of giant company like China is something that need to be done in the transportation, railway transportation industry as such. So for me, it is a good step. There are still going to be some other players, which I have a lot of respect for, because again, they are dedicated to one given part of mobility, which again makes sense. And combining players who can maybe offer a combination of technologies like let's talk about the railway, rolling stock, signaling, control centers, cybersec within this blah blah blah, is going to be something that can aggregate some smaller or more dedicated players, not smaller, but more dedicated players. So big things, yes, as long as you don't end up with one, agree. And as we are, I'm going to say, playing with the same rule, which sometimes is not always the case with some of the company we are talking about. So playing with the same rules, having the policymakers understand what is at stake behind. I'm not talking about sovereignty. I'm talking about real making sure that we understand what is the value behind and what it is that we need to rule versus what it is that we need to let free is what is going to be at stake from now.
Thank you, Stéphane. We now have to wrap up. I'd like to thank you so much for your very, very interesting and insightful contributions. This was a great conversation. We talked about many things. Of course, the industry, how can it recover by restoring self-confidence and confidence of users, obviously, in public transport in particular. We talked about security aspects, obviously, digitalization of industry, the type of market we'll have, what kind of players we need, obviously, multiple players in an entire ecosystem that takes into account multiple modes of transport. And of course, there are different landscapes we're looking at here in Canada or in the EU. But again, this is what is valuable here would be to share more of that experience and try to identify what is available, what can we better use, what really works. And so I'd like to thank you very much for all these very interesting points you've made. And now I'm turning to the next session to welcome the panelists of the discussion starting now on manufacturing. And you will hear from Canada Goose International, Pat Sherlock, but also you will hear from Olivier, Joris of FEB and Luisa Santos of Business Europe. And the conversation is led by Melina Howard of Lexfield. Thank you so much. And I will see you soon again later today. Enjoy the rest of the conversations and have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. I'm on the live now.
Hello.
Hi there. Okay, looks like we're in business.
I think we are. We're just waiting for Olivier and Luisa. Hello, Olivier.
Hello, can you hear me?
We will allow Luisa to connect, but we can start the session. So I'm very pleased to be moderating the panel on manufacturers. Thank you both already for being here. Just for the audience, so I will very briefly introduce everyone, and then everyone will get to introduce themselves. Pat, I will share your PowerPoint. The video was a little bit too heavy, so it will just be the PowerPoint, but I'm sure you'll be able to cover with your own words. And the good thing here is that we will have 3 different perspectives. So we have a Canadian perspective, a Belgian perspective with you, Olivier, and Luisa will give a more European perspective. So the topic of manufacturers. Pat, you are the international president of Canada Goose, which is a very well-known brand. So I think it will speak to many, many people. Olivier, you are...
As an FYI, we also...
Sorry?
Manufacturing in Europe as well. So 10% of our manufacturing is also out of Europe. So I'll be able to speak to European manufacturing.
Brilliant. And I think this is definitely a very interesting point you have here today to show the cooperation between the two, I was going to say countries, but I do consider Europe as a country. So maybe I'm a little bit biased. But and I see that Luisa will be joining us very shortly. And Olivier, which it's the Federation of Enterprises in Belgium, which is the largest employers organization. So your insight, the Belgian perspective will be also super interesting. And it certainly is also to me. So Pat, shall I let you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I mean, at this moment or two, we're not live right now, are we?
We are already.
My goodness.
Absolutely live. No, I'm afraid with the whole setup, we're actually directly live. So we started about 3 minutes ago, but that's fine. You haven't made any funny faces or said anything inappropriate. So I would have interrupted you.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for putting this together. I really was looking forward to seeing everyone in person. It's my first time at this sort of an event of this scale and this capacity in Europe, so I was really looking forward to it. And I'm also looking forward to just doing this digitally. I think it's a great alternative. But I also look forward to next year seeing everyone in person.
Good. And just for everyone, I will just a very brief that slide so it gives you actually. Sorry, I'm testing this for the first time, so hopefully it's going to work, and it is. And thankfully, I'm not someone who's too messy on my screen, so there isn't too much to see. And this will then hopefully give Luisa a chance to join us. And of course, I didn't quite open it, so I do apologize to everyone. I'm sort of practicing with this. I did practice yesterday, but on the spot is slightly different.
Melina,
I think it really speaks to everyone.
Melina, maybe before starting, can you confirm that you can hear me?
Oh, yes, I can.
Okay, great.
I'm so sorry I haven't checked.
Okay, great.
No, so no, this is really and manufacturing, and I think those slides are actually really good because they really show actually what manufacturing is about, and it's about people, and it's about people in their workplace, which in an environment like today has been made difficult. So I'm actually also looking forward to hearing about your insights on this. So those are the...
Yeah. So these are facilities, and what you're seeing images of, if you think about where we were just globally in March, as the pandemic, the headspace around the world, a lot of uncertainty, and I try to go back to where we were at that time as well. And what we did as a business is we completely transformed our manufacturing. So we took two facilities and put them back online because we were completely shut down. So we opened up two facilities during the pandemic and opened up the Canada Goose response program. So we had 50 employees, two facilities, and we made about 10,000 units of protective garments for the medical field. So we call it PPE, protective equipment for medical staff. And it started those two facilities, and it's grown. We've done over 2 million pieces now. We have 9 facilities producing these items and over 900 employees that are now supporting and building PPE equipment. So it's a Canada Goose response program, and we're quite proud of it. And it's something that we're very excited about.
Good. And actually, hello, Luisa. Thank you for joining us, Luisa. So allow me to introduce you briefly to the audience, and then I will go back to Olivier.
Yeah.
So Luisa and Santos, you'll be giving us a European perspective. I was explaining to everyone earlier that Pat will give us a Canadian as well as a European perspective because of all of the work they are also doing in Europe. Olivier, Joris will also focus on the Belgian aspects since he's working with the largest employers organization in Belgium. So there should be some insights in there. And Luisa, I'm also really looking forward to your European perspective, being a Deputy Director General of Business Europe, which speaks for itself. And Olivier, so if you want to introduce yourself, I'll let you, and then also give us your, I was wondering because Pat mentioned that Canada Goose has been doing, producing protective wear for the COVID. So I assume that there are some manufacturers in Belgium that have also been adapting to the demand.
Yes, indeed. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. Hello, Luisa. So just maybe to a few additional words before answering your question. So indeed, FAB is the largest employers organization in Belgium, and through 40 sectorial members, we do represent 50,000 companies from the industry, services, construction, retail, e-commerce, circular economy, and so on and so forth. Maybe something to underline is the fact that Belgium is a small country, but we are also, of course, a great country, but also a very open country and very open economy. You must know that more than 80% of the Belgian GDP directly depends on export. It's huge. Okay. It means that one job out of 5, and I'm speaking about 1 million workers, one job out of 5 in Belgium is directly related to export outside the EU. Of course, we export a lot within the single market, our neighboring countries, France, Germany, the Netherlands, and the UK. But we also export a lot outside the EU. And the good news is that the export of Belgian companies outside the EU is increasing. And it's extremely important for us, as we know, and the European Commission calculated that within a couple of years, 90% of the global growth will happen outside the EU. So it's really important for us to access these foreign markets. And it's a very good news and a positive trend that our export outside the EU is also growing.
This is where the link with Canada is actually really useful, because and it is actually Europe being quite where we are often referred to as the old continent. So it is important for us to open our eyes as well to the outside world. And I think Canada for that has this new energy and all of this, these new ideas. And for us yet to look outside of our box and to be able to do business outside of Europe, I do believe it's indeed a very important.
And if I just may add a final element, maybe Canada is of course a very important partner of Belgium within the EU. But it's important for us that it's a key partner of the EU. And I will explain this while using a figure. We calculated that when we directly export €100 to Canada, We also export additional 85 euros through the components that our companies export to, for example, our neighboring country, and they will be put in the final product, which will be exported to Canada. So we do not only look at the bilateral trade between Belgium and Canada, but we also look at the indirect export of our companies through the export of European companies to Canada. So indeed, Canada is an important partner on those levels.
And I think what will also be interesting to see is the, well, for Europe to also import from Canada, because we are exporting a lot, but it's good to see also different brands coming in and sort of sharing. And thankfully there are, well, plenty of consumers, so it goes both ways. But allow me now to go back to Luisa. So Luisa, would you like to give a brief introduction about yourself and really sort of what drives you?
Thanks, Melina. And apologies for this difficult entrance. The funny thing is, I was listening to you and seeing you all, but you could not hear me or see me. So that was the issue. So I was there already at the beginning. Anyway, we sorted out. So I'm here. So we represent the European business across the EU27, but we go further than that as Business Europe. So we have members around 35. We have 35 members around basically all Europe, members of the EU, and the ones that have a close relation with Europe or are in process of accession to the EU. I mean, we have, of course, still the UK, but also Turkey, Serbia, or Norway. So it's quite a large representation. And of course, we have a lot of manufacturing, but we also have companies active in the area of services. So we are a bit the umbrella organization, a bit like the Canadian Chamber, although we are not a chamber. We are an employers organization, so we are also a social partner, but we have very good relations with a number of business organizations in Canada, including the Canadian Chamber, but also other. Maybe just to say that we are big defenders of global trade and free trade and of free trade agreements such as CETA, the agreement we have with Canada. And because I'm dealing with international relations, of course, this has always been one of our key priorities, and it still is, how to make sure that we reap the benefits of these agreements. And this is something we will, I'm sure, discuss as we go forward. Yeah.
Well, there are indeed quite a few questions, and I just also wanted to point it out, if anyone wants from the audience to ask questions, please put them through the chat, and we'll take as many questions as possible, but we may not be able to take all the questions. But feel free to start sending in questions, and I will do my best to note them and ask them in the last part of this panel. And I think that actually the first question will be an interesting one, especially when we go back to manufacturing, which is actually producing. And so outsourcing a production line, will it still be a trend as it's been for quite a while now, for the last few decades, and was very rapidly evolving until obviously the world changed a little bit earlier this year with the COVID. And has it, on a Canadian side, I think both you, Olivier, and Pat, I'll be curious to hear. And Luisa, please feel free at any time to also make your comments. But in terms of getting back production from Asia, I'm so sorry, because I do want the world to be a happy place and everyone to do business. But the focus today here is Canada and Europe. So outsourcing a production line, how can you give us your insight, maybe Pat, and then we'll go to you, Olivier, how you've seen it in practice?
Yeah, so I think, Olivier, do you mind if I go first, or would you like to go first?
Okay, well, Pat is giving you the honor of speaking first on the topic, if you're okay to speak.
Yes, with pleasure. It's a huge question, of course, and there's no black and white answer. But maybe interesting to notice is the fact that we are a little bit worried when we listen to some politicians and the commissioners talking about, for example, a concept of open strategic autonomy, and saying that actually Europe is maybe too much dependent on global supply chains from Asia, for example, and we should relocate a huge part of the industry in Europe or in Belgium. So we had lots of contacts on this with the members to check whether they feel that there is a real problem as regards our global supply chains, of course, during the COVID. And with a huge exception being health and subsectors in health, we also what happened with masks and gels and protection equipment. But except for these, no single of our members, also coming from the manufacturing industry, complain on a problematic dependency on the global supply chains. On the contrary, according to them, the global supply chains helped to diversify the supply from all over the world. So when we talk about the resilience of the private sector of the global supply chains, we don't see any problem except lessons to be learned for the health sector. Of course, the resilience of states, of the authorities, there's maybe something else. And of course, there are some lessons to be learned from the COVID crisis. But as regards the global supply chains for our manufacturers, there were no real problems. Of course, there were some logistic problems. And we have, for example, a Volvo cars in Ghent, in Belgium. It's a Chinese investment now. It's in Chinese hands. Of course, when the train with the components doesn't leave China, of course, it has an impact on the factory here in Belgium. But it's not linked to a problematic dependency on the supply chain. It's just a temporary logistic issue. But so, and that's really a message that we try to convey, that please don't believe that just making like that overnight, the industry will come back to Europe just because you want the industry to do so. Such a top-down political message will not work.
That I do agree, and I think, but I suspect that there are a lot of factors to look at as well in terms of cost, but that will come back to it. But that just allow me, because the way we in Luxembourg and in most places around the world, I mean, when we were on lockdown, we could obviously, I'm in the service industry, so I could work from home. But when it comes to manufacturers, those physically stopped for 2 months. So it has had an impact, or maybe there was sufficient stock. Sorry if it's, go for it. It's a question for you, Olivier, sorry. Just because you said that there was, you know, it all sort of, all of the positive, which I do believe, but everything did stop for 2 months, unless I totally missed something.
No, of course, it was a real huge crisis as regards the demand, and that's true. And indeed, when your key suppliers or key customers are in a lockdown, it has an immediate impact on your production in Europe or in Belgium. That's for sure. Some companies had stock, other ones not, but it will not fully jeopardize the economic rationale behind the global supply chains, getting close to your export markets, to your biggest suppliers or clients. So there are always good reasons behind the global supply chains, and the good news is that, as I said, even from Asia or China, globally speaking, it worked quite well, and it helped to diversify the supply. But of course,
I think that you're absolutely right to focus on this work, because this is the way forward. So I see we've lost Pat, so hopefully he will reconnect very soon. Luisa, was waiting for Pat regarding this. So getting the production back from Asia, but maybe you could give us your insight, because even within Europe, there is production in sort of what we call Western Europe and then Eastern Europe. And has the COVID and all of this crisis, and where we've realized we needed to manufacture a bit more here in Europe, has it opened opportunities in Eastern Europe then as well?
Well, let me echo what Olivier said to start. I think that what we saw here was a huge challenge in terms of demand of certain products.
Yeah.
And of course, because there was this surge in demand, production and the supply was not prepared. So I think this is the reality, and we should try to demystify everything else. So this is the fact. This could happen. It happened today in healthcare. Tomorrow it can happen somewhere else. And we cannot foresee all these crises. We can try to foresee to a certain extent, but not completely. And of course, companies cannot stockpile everything. That's not feasible from an economic point of view. So
and there's an expiration date as well to take into consideration.
Exactly. So you cannot, I mean, let's focus on the problem. So, and what the problem is, and let's not take it to an extent that, you know, we create more problems instead of solving this one. So is there a lot of dependency on certain production or manufacturers? Maybe in some areas. Is this necessarily bad? Not always. But it's true that if you are, but this is a company decision, and the companies have been doing this. I mean, it's in your own interest not to be dependent on a certain product or a certain supplier, because of course you are putting all your eggs in one basket is not the best solution. I mean, also for us as consumers, I mean, we had this situation when we had the financial crisis and the financial sector crisis, where we saw how important it was to, you know, diversify the risk. So for us, and Olivier already mentioned this, the key is diversification. It's not necessarily relocating production to Europe or Eastern Europe or Western Europe. Of course, if there are additional opportunities to have production in Europe that makes a business sense, because I think this is important. I mean, it's not going to happen, as Olivier said, because politicians say so. It's going to happen if there is a business case, if investors are ready to put the money and do it. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So yes, for us, the key is actually open more business opportunities outside Europe, but also open more business opportunities to import. Because of course, we are not just exporting, we're also importing. And we will never be able to do everything in Europe or to export everything from Europe without importing. I mean, we are not the ones who think that trade deficits are necessarily bad. I mean, you need to have an overall picture of what is your balance of your exports and imports. So it's very important to look at new opportunities to diversify, being imports or exports. And this, I think, with Canada, we have done a lot in these 3 years of CETA, but we still have a lot to do. And I think we need to also focus a little bit more on what can be done to help us to recover also from the COVID-19 crisis.
Absolutely. And well, thank you very much for insisting on diversity. And you're absolutely right. We need to keep things balanced between import and export, because as we all know, in business, we can only do business if we give business to someone, then they'll do business as well with us. So Pat, you're back online. Thank you. So we were just on the question of outsourcing a production line. Do you want to give us your experience on this?
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, we've been, for the last 10 years, we've been literally scaling infrastructure in Canada to manufacture in Canada. It's part of our brand, part of our DNA. And our philosophy is that you need to make the best products in the best places. And when it comes to making parkas and making jackets, you can't get a better place in Canada. There's lots of expertise. We've been doing this for a long time. And it's part of our brand proposition to the world. And we sell a little piece of Canada in every jacket. We also see value in developing things like knitwear in the best places in the world as well, which are Italy. So we have a significant manufacturing contribution from Italy and markets as well in Europe. So it's our business is evolving. 90% of our production is done in Canada, and we are training employees. We're literally teaching people how to sew jackets and passing along that expertise and blending that expertise from a pure human level and a skill level. But there's a lot of value in not just our brand proposition being made in Canada, but also the stability of Canada, the economic stability of Canada. We can be a lot more flexible. We can, there's so many benefits for us in terms beyond just the brand to manufacturing. It's something that we're quite excited about.
Oh, great. Yeah, but that's, and I think, and it brings me to actually the next question, because cost is obviously an issue for when you're manufacturing the goods, when you are the one distributing them, but also as a consumer. So have you found, and that would be a question actually, which also the three of you do come in terms of, do you feel that people in Europe and Canada don't mind paying a higher price when it's actually produced in Canada and in Europe, or will they prefer to buy lesser quality goods, but because they're a lot cheaper? Or do you think it's it really depends on the product? So I don't know whether you can tell. I'm sure you must have figures, Pat, in terms of who are your consumers.
Yeah, we do twice a year. We do a pretty intense global consumer insights analysis, and it's being in Europe now. It's my third year in Europe. The complexity of the European consumer is quite rich, rich in terms of diversity. It's a very complex market, as is Canada, but Europe in particular has a very complex consumer. I think no matter where you are in the world, one thing that has always resonated is authenticity. Authenticity has never gone away. People are drawn to authentic brands. And to be real, to be meaningful means a lot, and it means a lot more than ever right now. I think what's changing is a consumer, no matter where they are, cares more about how things are made, where it's made, how it's sourced, what's the footprint this item's going to leave on the earth. And making things that last, making things that are built well, matter more than ever. And the reality is not everyone can go and afford a really expensive item. And that's why we're seeing the introduction of a lot of rental companies that rent high-end items, where you have a membership fee. Like Rent the Runway is a good example, where you have a membership fee every month and you rent certain items. So I think consumer is going in a direction. We've, Goose has for years. We have a lifetime warranty on our jackets, so you have it for life. Send it back, we'll make it first. We're deeply committed to making something that's really built to work first. Work, it has to be functional, but the days of making something really cheap, having it go to into the garbage after a month, the quick and disposable, that is going away. Every consumer is looking for, consumers more and more now are looking for a good sustainable product that's going to last, and that's where the consumer is going.
Okay. And Olivier, do you have an insight in terms of consumers in Belgium as well, how matters have evolved and how production and manufacturing is adapting to this?
Again, a huge question. No black and white answer, but
I know you have the shoulder to answer them, so go for it.
No, what we see in Belgium, I guess, is more or less the same in the whole European Union and in the Western countries. We see, of course, an increasing interest of consumers for the way the goods are produced. And maybe also to make a link with CETA and the free trade agreements in general, that's precisely something very important, that trade becomes, of course, cheaper to export, cheaper to import, due to the abolition of tariffs, but also simplification of customs procedures. So it's good for the B2B and the B2C relations. So good for the consumers at the end of the day. But I think it's also very important, and Luisa can maybe also elaborate on this, the fact that it doesn't happen against the European norms and standards. And CETA, for example, is quite clear and black and white written that the promotion of global trade and investment will not have a negative impact. It cannot have a negative impact on the European standards, the rules in Europe, the consumer protection, for example. And I think that's a very key element in the global discussion and sometimes huge debates on the free trade agreements. I think it's really important to also say from business community that we don't want to lower the European norms and standards. It's also the specificity of our products. And we see the free trade agreements as a way to promote sustainable development with our global partners, and it doesn't happen on the cost, if I may say, of the European norms and standards.
Oh, that's a very good point, and it's true in terms of sustainability. Having those higher standards and making sure that everyone adapts to those same good standards will just improve the world we live in. And Luisa, do you want to add something on this?
Maybe.
It's very keen to hear your views on this.
Maybe to complement a bit what Pat and Olivier said. I think definitely there is an increasing market for more sustainable products. The consumer wants to know if you are respecting human rights, if you are respecting a minimum social standards. There is an increased pressure now in Europe also and the young generation, but not only in Europe, in Canada, I think too. How can we help to address climate change, and can we use products that can also benefit